Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what's up? This is part 2 of the Week 10 episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Can't believe it's Week 10 already. We got to start thinking about playoff matchups and
playoffs.
Yep, playoffs. Yeah, and how you want to fill your bench going forward. You know, do you want to fill them with streamers that have good playoff matchups? If you have those top running backs, get those handcuffs if you don't already have them. Be active if your trading deadline hasn't expired yet. You know, be active. Try and go after those teams that are on the fringe. I'm going to tell you about a couple trades I actually made in one of my half point PPR leagues. So I have Zach Ertz, who was on his bye this week, and I needed a tight end, and so I start looking around and start shopping around some of the guys I had on my bench, like DK Metcalf, and I was talking with the Travis Kelce owner, who also has Mark Andrews. And he said he would be interested in DK Metcalf, so I gave him Metcalf and Latavius Murray for Travis Kelce. And since Ertz is on his bye, and I don't need both of these tight ends going forward, I then traded Ertz for Edelman, who's also on his bye, which I think kind of helped make that deal happen. We're both, me and my boy Ranger Rick at work, we're both 6-3 in that league. So, helping each other out. It's like I said, it's a PPR league, and Edelman is fantastic. So, just made my team better, and I'm way more confident in this team going forward than I was, for the past few weeks, especially with Ertz not playing as well as he usually does. What we've come to expect from him. And yes, last week he had his big game, so I don't know if it was a sell high or whatever you want to call it, but it definitely made my team better now that I have. I basically traded two bench players for Travis Kelce, and then traded essentially what would be my backup tight end for a wide receiver too. So we got these 6 NFC home games here, starting with the Panthers at the Packers. So apparently Cam Newton is done for the season. He's now on IR. It is now Kyle Allen's team, and I remember watching, I think it was PTI last night, and they're saying how, the Panthers are excited about Kyle Allen, and they might be considering moving on from Cam Newton, and, what teams could potentially be interested in him. And I'll tell you what, I'll take him on my team. The Jets could use anybody right now. So Christian McCaffrey had back-to-back games now with really tough matchups for running backs, and with a backup quarterback, but yet he still put up 321 total yards and 4 touchdowns. And he gets the Packers defense this week that allows the 2nd most receptions, the 5th most receiving yards, and the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. So McCaffrey should have a huge game. FanDuel, I'm sure he's going to be the number 1 most expensive running back. I think he's still worth it because I think he's going to run all over this team. So, and like I said, it's now Kyle Allen's team. And although DJ Moore had 10 targets to Curtis Samuel's 6 last week, the two of them have 43 and 44 targets since Kyle Allen has taken over. So they're pretty much dead even there. However, I think Curtis Samuels is the guy that you want to own there. Samuels has an ADOT, which is average depth of target, of 15.5 yards, whereas Moore's is 11.2. So Samuels is being targeted deeper down the field. Also, Samuels has caught 4 of his 7 red zone targets for all 3 of his touchdowns so far this season, whereas DJ Moore now has 2 catches on only 4 red zone targets, and he has not converted any one of them for a touchdown. And plus, on a team with a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who's going to be a red zone hog, they're give the ball to your best player, and Christian McCaffrey definitely is that. So I think Curtis Samuels is the better wide receiver. I have him in 2 of my leagues, and I've kind of stacked at wide receiver in both of them, really. He's kind of just been sitting on my bench all season, but I think he's great. Looking at the Packers. So the Packers offense looked lost last week. They punted on their first 5 possessions, which, if I had the time, I'd go back and look at all of Aaron Rodgers' game logs, because I'm willing to bet he has never had 5 straight possessions where they resulted in a punt. Maybe not never, but I doubt it happens all that often. So their offense definitely had a bad game last week against the Chargers. They were down by 16 points going into the fourth quarter, which explains why we only saw the Packers run the ball 10 times. As a Devontae Adams owner who has been waiting for weeks for this guy to return, it was great seeing him step right into an 11-target game. But I think the Packers are going to focus on the run this week, with the Panthers allowing the 5th most fantasy points to running backs, and the Packers run D being so bad, and run CMC coming into town, they can't allow the game script to mimic last week, which was the Chargers. I think they ran it between the 2 running backs there, between Gordon and Eckler. I think they had 32 rushes, so they can't allow that to happen again. They're going to have to try and control the clock. The Chargers won that time of possession by 11 minutes, which is a lot. They're going to try and slow down McCaffrey, but I doubt they're going to be very successful. So we'll have to see what happens with the amount of carries that these Packer running backs get. But I think at least in the beginning of the game, they're going to really try and focus on getting the running game going. So besides Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, and Devontae Adams, I'm not sure I'm willing to play anybody else on the Packers. Obviously Aaron Rodgers as well. But these other wide receivers, again, none of them have really stood out all that much. It's kind of funny. Geronimo Allison with 2 targets, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling with 2 targets. And then you look at the other 2 guys, Jake Camaro and Alan Lazard, had 6 targets between the 2 of them. So we may be seeing a shifting of the guard as far as the second level wide receiver options at the Packers. But Devontae Adams, I don't think, is still 100% healthy, and when he is, he'll be right back to being a monster. So I'm excited that he's back on the field and that he's, looking healthy. All right, so the Lions at the Bears, NFC North, both of these teams coming off of a loss. Man, was I wrong on this game as far as the Packers-Eagles go last week. I thought the Bears were going to put up some points on this really bad Eagles secondary, but by halftime, the Bears' offense had 9 total yards. I'm sitting there watching the game with my girlfriend, and she's like, 9 total yards? That's not a lot of yards. And I'm like, yeah, babe, that's not a lot of yards at all. So they looked pathetic. They had 6 first-half punts. If it wasn't for David Montgomery's 2 touchdowns, one of them which was set up by a 53-yard bomb to Taylor Gabriel, the Bears their offense would have done absolutely nothing. I expect the Bears to try and feed David Montgomery like they did in Week 8 when they let him touch the ball 31 times. The Lions allow the most fantasy points to running backs going into Week 10. So if this Bears team comes out and only gets David Montgomery 12 to 15 touches again, then that head coach needs to be fired, because he's obviously not able to look at the matchups and adjust. He's just kind of stuck in his ways. And Mitchell Trubisky he's looking like a complete bust on PTI. If you ever watch that show, Michael Wilbon will always point out how he was drafted ahead of Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, which is pretty wild. Looking at the Lions, so with no semblance of a professional running game, the Lions tried to just have Matthew Stafford win the game for him. And if it wasn't for T.J. Hawkinson leaving the game in the fourth quarter with what was believed to be a concussion at the time, and then apparently the head coach, Matt Patricia, said he just got the wind knocked out of him, which is pretty scary to me if you're a professional tight end and you get the wind knocked out of you and you have to come out of the game for 4 plays on the last drive of the game when you're down by a touchdown. But anyway, I think they would have won it because Matthew Stafford was looking great. 406 yards with 3 touchdowns. I think they would have at least tied the game on that final drive where the backup tight end Logan Thomas was targeted in the red zone on the second to last play of the game, and he was targeted in the end zone on the last play of the game. But I forget the name of the Raider defender, but he made a really nice play on the ball. I'm going to assume that those targets would have went to T.J. Hawkinson. I'm particularly bitter about this game because I had T.J. Hawkinson as one of my anytime TD scorers on FanDuel, and it did not work out, so I'm kind of pissed about that. But Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones are both obviously must starts until the Lions show that they can actually run the ball. They're both obviously top dogs there for sure. Kind of going back to the tight end situation, last week the Lions played the Raiders, who ranked in the top 5 for most fantasy points allowed to tight ends, which explains why they ran that play at the end of the fourth quarter, 4th and goal with the game on the line. And this week they go to Chicago, who allows the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. So if Hawkinson is cleared, I'm going to give him another shot. 7 targets last week. If he's clear, if he's good to go, as long as it's not a concussion after all. There's been times where guys have come out of games thinking it was a concussion. They say it's not a concussion, and then 3 or 4 days later, the concussion symptoms show up. So you just never know with these head injuries. So keep an eye on T.J. Hawkinson. A week where there's 6 buys, I'm sure there's a couple teams out there that's kind of really struggling, especially at tight end, to figure out what you're going to do. All right, Cardinals at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Kenyon Drake, with his best game as a pro, he had, what did he have? 15 carries for 110 yards and a touchdown. Also caught all 4 of his targets for 52 yards, so really good game for him. I added Drake in one of my leagues a couple days before the trading deadline after, in a league where I was hurting at running back. I lost Kerryon Johnson. I added him, and, I was just kind of hoping, whatever team, hopefully he gets traded, and whatever team he gets traded to, I hope it's going to be a better situation than the one he was in with the freaking Dolphins, so... and so I took that chance, and it paid off for me. Unfortunately, I missed out on Drake's 26 fantasy point game because I was nervous about playing him versus the top run defense of the 49ers and how little time he had to learn the playbook. But his performance taught me, and it's happened numerous times over the past couple of years, where talented running backs that are expected to get a big workload, they don't need to learn the playbook. The coaches will do whatever. A good coach will set these guys up to succeed. They're not going to call these ridiculous plays with motions, and is not going to ask them to do anything crazy in pass protection or anything like that. Just tell them what hole to hit and let their talent and their instincts kind of do the work. Luckily, I still won, and I was able to sell high on Drake. I may have overpaid a little bit, but in this league, I had Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers on my roster, so I had to move one of them. Throughout the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've been shopping them around, and I haven't really been getting any good offers. So I traded Rodgers and Drake for David Johnson. So I saw a report today that David Johnson says he's 100% healthy and that he's going to be playing this week. And I know Drake looked great in his first game with the Cardinals, and Chase Edmonds also looked really good in the game that he was able to start. So the Cardinals definitely have some options there, but with that offense and with how great of a pass catcher David Johnson is, this is a PPR league. I'm going to take that gamble. I'm going to try and turn, a a QB situation where I got lucky that I had two of the best quarterbacks you can ask for, and got what I could for one of them. So Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk combined for only 6 catches on 9 targets for a whopping 46 yards, while Andy Isabella and Keyshawn Johnson, which that name as a Jets fan just kind of makes me cringe, but they combined for 3 catches on 4 targets for 110 yards, and both of Kyler Murray's touchdowns. So I expect Christian Kirk to get back on track versus this Buccaneers defense, who allow the most fantasy points to wide receivers. You can't ask for a better matchup. So, hopefully these the wide receivers that we're used to seeing play well for the Cardinals, hopefully, or the one really. Larry Fitzgerald has kind of had a pretty down year, but hopefully Christian Kirk can get back on track. So, looking at the Buccaneers here, so I saw a quote on the Fantasy Life app, which if you're a fantasy football player or any fantasy player, really, you got to get this app. It's awesome. You get all these notifications telling you all kinds of great things. So one of the things I saw on there, Bruce Arians said that Ronald Jones has earned the right to start and get more snaps. 20 touches for Ronald Jones to only 4 for Peyton Barber last week. Arians said that Ronald Jones has been the more explosive back. So. And the Bucs get the Cardinals and their defense that sucks at defending running backs in the pass game. Jones has only had 11 targets in 8 games so far this season, but I expect Arians to add that into this week's game plan. Arians is one of the best play callers in the NFL. He'll be able to look at this defense, see that as the weakness that it is, and he'll figure out a way to get the ball to Ronald Jones in those situations. So. And it's also somewhat of a revenge game for Bruce Arians. Coaches get the feel revenge too. I don't know how many teams Bruce Arians has been a part of, but he's coached a lot of football, and the Cardinals were the first team to give him his a head coaching opportunity, and a couple years later they fired him. So I expect him to really be feeling the revenge. Yes. Mike Evans with back-to-back double-digit reception games, 83 fantasy points in his last 3 games. That's in a half-point PPR format. For all the people that were saying Godwin had taken over the number 1 spot, I cheers to you. You were wrong, sir. They're both awesome. They're both going to be. You got to play both of them every single week. You're never going to sit either of these guys. If you do, you're an idiot. I don't know if we're going to see both of them have 100+ yard games. I should have went and looked if it's happened yet this season, but they're both great, and maybe it might go back and forth. The defense focuses on this guy, and then eventually they got to go back to this guy, and blah blah blah. So. We'll see how that shakes up towards the end of the season, but they're both awesome plays, so can't go wrong either way. All right, the next game is the Falcons at the Saints. I think this could end up being one of the highest scoring games of the week. So Matt Ryan is still questionable after an extra week off. They're coming off their bye. Both these teams coming off their bye, actually. He's got that ankle injury, and we saw Matt Schaub step into Week 8 and throw 52 passes versus Seattle. He had 460 yards with a touchdown and an interception. I don't know if he's going to do that again if Matt Schaub is to start, but it just kind of goes to show what this offense can do, whether or not Matt Ryan plays or not. So. Devontae Freeman with only 13 carries in that game, but he caught all 8 of his targets for 63 yards. And this Saints defense is allowing the running backs to catch the 5th most passes and the 7th most receiving yards. So I think they're going to be down in this game like they have in a lot of games. So I expect another good game for Devontae Freeman in the pass game. I expect him to be involved a lot, especially now that Mohamed Sanu is not there. So it's now just Julio, Calvin Ridley, and Austin Hooper. So I'm playing all 3 of these guys regardless of who plays at quarterback. Plus the Saints are allowing the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers, so they also have a good matchup. Like I said, I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. So if I have any of these players, I'm pretty happy about. I'm looking forward to this matchup. For the Saints, Alvin Kamara in 2 games last year versus Atlanta, he averaged 144 total yards in each one. The Falcons allow the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. So coming off of an injury, coming out of the bye week, you got to play Alvin Kamara. You play Drew Brees, Michael Thomas. I think Ted Ginn's an awesome play as well. The Falcons' defense is terrible. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. To me, the tough decision in this game is Latavius Murray. In the past 2 games without Kamara, he's had 62 touches and 307 total yards with 4 touchdowns in 2 games. It's pretty ridiculous. He's looked absolutely fantastic. I know Kamara is a special player, and Sean Payton loves him. But I just don't know what the splits are going to be as far as the touches go. But with 6 teams on bye, he's not a bad play, especially in this matchup. But there is definitely a risk that he just gives you a complete dud if Kamara is 100% healthy. He was officially removed from the injury report today, so like I said, I'm just I just don't know what to make of how Sean Payton's going to use this. I don't know if maybe they kind of use Latavius Murray in those short yardage situations. Maybe they kind of lean on Murray to be more of the ball carrier and let Kamara just work as a receiver. We'll have to wait and see. But like I said, in this matchup, there should be a hell of a lot of fantasy points to go around. And, you probably can't go wrong with either one of them. So should be a fun game. All right, the next one is the Vikings at the Cowboys. No surprise, the 3 most highest scoring games for the Cowboys this year have been the 3 games that all 3 of these wide receivers were healthy. Talking Amari Cooper, Randall Cobb, Michael Gallup. These guys seem to really complement each other well, with Zeke catching the ball out of the backfield and Witten doing what he does for the past 15 years, especially against the Giants. Jesus, he kills the Giants. If the Cowboys' defense can continue to play well, we will see just how good this Cowboys run defense is against Dalvin Cook this week. But with 6 teams on bye, I think you can start all 3 of these wide receivers. The only position that the Vikings don't allow the top 10 fewest fantasy points to is the wide receiver position. Obviously, you can't get away from Ezekiel Elliott, but this Vikings pass defense, at least, has not been what it was over the past couple of years. So yeah, I'm playing all these guys, really. Dalvin Cook was somewhat of a disappointment last week to me. He was another guy that I had as an anytime touchdown scorer on FanDuel, and it did not work out. I thought it was a slam dunk, and on one of the top 3 rushing offenses versus one of the worst run Ds, I don't know how he didn't score, but he still gave us 116 total yards, which is great. Cousins continue to trend, not a good one. So far this year, he's had over 30 pass attempts in 4 games, and the Vikings now have lost 3 of those 4 games. So there's a reason why the head coach, Mike Zimmer, does not want Kirk Cousins to be whipping the ball around all game. There's a reason why they got rid of their offensive coordinator last year. He wants to run the ball. So we'll see how this shakes up. Going forward with Adam Thielen left the game last week. He's probably not going to play this week. The hamstring injury wasn't healthy enough, I guess. And in a game without Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs was only able to muster up 2 fantasy points. Another big letdown. The Vikings in Week 9 were kind of just a letdown in general. So I'm sure Adam Thielen's looking to have a bounce-back game. Dalvin Cook's looking to have... Stephon Diggs is looking to have a bounce-back game after only 2 fantasy point game last week and with no Adam Thielen to play this week. This is not the greatest matchup, though. Dallas Cowboys do allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks and the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So if he does put up another dud, just outlined how much the Vikings want to stick to the run, I wouldn't be surprised. All right, last game of the week. This is one of the games I'm definitely looking forward to the most. Seahawks at the 49ers. Russell Wilson is absolutely ridiculous. I think him and Lamar Jackson. I think the MVP voters are going to have a hell of a time picking between the two of them. Wilson with 5 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion last week. Threw the ball 43 times. This season, he has a 7.5 touchdown percentage and a career touchdown percentage of 6.1. So that's how many of the percentage of your pass attempts that result in a touchdown. So may not sound like a lot, 6 and 7%, but just to put it into perspective, he's tied right now with Aaron Rodgers at eighth in all time on the list of touchdown percentage. 4 of the 7 guys that are above him on that list are Hall of Famers. Names like Sid Luckman, Otto Graham, Lenny Dawson, Sammy Baugh. And then the other 3 guys are all dudes that played in like the 50s or something where, if they threw the ball 20 times in a game, that was like, oh my God, what are they doing? So Russell Wilson is, having another historically efficient season. What this dude does. So in this game, where I think it's gonna be an awesome game of, the old cliche, it's gonna be a smash mouth football game for sure. 2 teams that love to run the ball. So, playing Chris Carson, Tyler Lockett with 18 freaking targets last week, man. It was ridiculous. 2 touchdowns, caught 13 of them for 152 yards. DK Metcalf also had an awesome game, 6 catches on 9 targets for 123 and a touchdown. So I think both of them are easy plays in this game. Despite the 49ers defense, which has been the pass defense has been really good. Second fewest to quarterbacks, 5th fewest to wide receivers, the fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Last week, the Seahawks' only healthy tight end was Jacob Hollister, who caught 4 of his 6 targets for 37 yards and 2 touchdowns. On this team, I don't think it really matters who suits up at tight end. Russell Wilson has shown the ability to make that guy valuable. He'll target him. He'll target him in the red zone, and he's just such an amazing passer. He's going to get you the ball. And it really doesn't take much for a tight end to have a good game, especially in a PPR league where, you catch 4 or 5 passes for 30, 40 yards. There you go. You got yourself an average tight end. So yeah, it's those are the guys I'm interested in on the Seahawks. Looking at the 49ers, so between the running backs, Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida last week, Coleman outsnapped Breida 59% to 33%. Breida did come into the game questionable. It was a short week, but Breida saw 3 more touches, and he more than doubled Coleman's yards per carry. So Breida was the more efficient running back last week. He's questionable again going into this week. He's got an ankle injury, but it seems like he's questionable every week, all his entire career now, really. They're both easy RB2s to me. With the volume that they're going to get in this offense and how good that defense is, I think they're both easy plays every week. George Kittle, if he's healthy, he is one of the best plays this week, with the Seahawks allowing the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. He didn't practice Tuesday or Thursday, so he's probably going to end up being a game-time decision, which means you're going to have to watch that super closely, have a backup planned in mind. Apparently, Kyle Juszczyk, it might be coming back this week. Not sure in your league if he's classified as a running back or as a tight end, but if Kittle doesn't play and Juszczyk does play, I think he's definitely worth a play for sure. You give a matchup like this to Kyle Shanahan, who's another awesome play caller. I think he's going to figure out a way to use him, and he loves using Kyle Juszczyk. The dude kind of does everything for that team. Final point on this game, Emmanuel Sanders is now a must-play wide receiver to me. He's I was saying how excited I was about him being on this team. I think he's a great fit, and Seattle's secondary isn't all that great. Plus, if Kittle misses, Sanders should be an absolute monster. And also, I think Deebo Samuels would also be in play if there is no Kittle. Deebo with 7 targets last week, which is a lot on a team that runs the ball as much as the 49ers do. So if Kittle's out, I think Sanders is the man. And I think Deebo's not a horrible play either. But like I said, I expect this to be a big running game for both teams, really. And I think it's going to be an awesome game. So I'm excited about it for sure. So thanks for tuning in to part 2 of the Week 10 episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you check out next week. There'll only be 4 teams on, or I think there's only 2 teams on bye next week. So we'll have a lot more games to go through. So thanks again, and as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.